Good evening, beautiful people. One Love Consciousness Movement and First Unity Spiritual Campus. I welcome you into this place this evening. So glad that you're willing to join. Middle of the week and hang out just a little bit. I'm going to move this microphone just a tad there so that it's in a better position. You probably hear the noise from it, and I apologize for that up front, but hey, this is just a live stream and we edit as we go. No post-production. Welcome in. I'm so glad you're here. I want to share a few thoughts with you this evening, but before we do that, I'm going to invite us to take just a moment and come into this space together here and now. We just receive a deep breath in and exhale. And once again, deep breath in and exhale. We come to this space this evening with open hearts and open minds. We say, Spirit, lead us where our trust is without borders. Let us walk on the water wherever you'd call us. Take us deeper than our feet could ever wander, and our faith is made stronger in that holy, sacred presence. That beautiful power and presence, source that is the ground of all being, the sky above, the encapsulating, invisible and indivisible, shapeless and formless presence from which all things come to be. This is that labelless awesomeness that we have attempted to call God. We've called it God, and we've tried to come up with labels, and we surrender to it, and we say, Spirit of truth that emanates from the source, bring to us what you will, take from us what you will, take us where you will. We are completely and totally surrendered. We let go of anything that would stand in the way of our forward progress and our growth. May we learn to flow and grow and glow in this pure presence without any hesitation. May we practice sweet and total surrender to the ultimate, the supreme. We are surrendered this evening in the name and the nature of the indwelling presence, and so it is. On these evenings like this, I like to come to you from our back porch, but it's been rainy and windy here in our area all throughout the day today and into this evening. So I'm going to spare you the sound of wind blowing into the microphone and just be with you here actually at my kitchen table where the backdrop of the backyard is there. It's still there. We're just inside instead of outside. I mentioned something that this last Sunday to our team, our spiritual support team, along with our greeters, our staff members who gather in at 10:30 on Sundays to do what we call a pray-in, where we gather together at 10:30 and we just prepare our hearts and our souls to start to serve the greater community that comes in. And a couple of hundred people or so a week who come in to share in this beautiful celebration. And our team gets together to sort of take on this similar energy, to be in one mind and one accord. And some things that I've been sharing lately can for some be disturbing. I've heard people say that. One lady came to me and she said she was a little disturbed that I had said, and she wasn't angry. She said she's trying to work with it and wrestling with this idea that God is not energy. And asked me if I would attempt to kind of unpack that a little bit. So this evening I want to unpack that a little bit, and I also want to deal with something that I said, and these are downloads that are coming my way. These are things, truths that are locating me, and I'm also grappling with them and wrestling with them a little bit and trying to allow myself to be a conduit for maybe further explanation, to sort of channel, if you will, this information and inspiration that's coming from the divine. At least that's my estimation for my personal life. It feels divine, it feels wonderful, and at the same time, it also is a little disturbing in that it's kind of reshaping things within me, and maybe in some ways starting to reshape a few things for all of us as a collective. But the one statement that I made, that God is not energy, is a little disturbing for anyone really who has studied a lot of New Thought ideas and New Age ideas, because we have always, many of us have adopted ideas that God is energy. We've referred to God as energy. I've referred to God as energy. And it just occurred to me, and I believe it occurred to me from a deep place of truth, that energy is also measurable and quantifiable, which means even energy is not the best description of God or the source, the divine. That before energy is experienced, before energy is put out into the ether, before that ever happens, God is. So the idea is to understand that no matter how far back we go in the layers, if we are aware of the layers and we're able to touch the layers and measure those layers, that is also not God. And I said in sort of a frustrating tone recently that I'm really getting to the place where I don't want to talk about God. And really I'm getting to the place I don't want to talk about God simply because I believe that God, the divine, the source, is beyond our explanation and really lands more in the realm of surrender and then experience, so that there is a sense of it flowing to me, for me, through me, and ultimately, I believe the final stage is to show up as me. So we talked about life and how life, this was last Wednesday, how life doesn't begin when the egg is fertilized. It doesn't begin when the baby cries outside of the womb and breathes air for the first time. It doesn't begin there. Life just is. And your life is not measured in the lifespan of your human experience. Your life existence is in the more permanent and eternal rather than the impermanent and encapsulated time frame of a linear lifespan, as we call it. In fact, using the term life for what we're experiencing here it's the term we've come up with to try to talk about this incarnation and iteration. But truly, life itself, as we have understood it, that energetic outpicturing from the source, is ongoing, existed before 1977, September the 2nd, when I was born, and will exist far after. I will exist in consciousness far after this body is unzipped and my soul leaves it. So God is not energy is simply to say that even energy itself is an emanation and a manifestation that comes from the source, and that the source is ineffable. God, the divine, is beyond explanation. God, the divine, is beyond label. That there is nothing that can explain this bigger and better vision and version of God. The good news is that means that none of us are experts. And all of us, the bad news is that all of us will need to surrender our ego to that ultimate source, trust ultimately, because that's really what faith is ultimate trust. We'll need to trust God, trust the divine, and simply surrender to it. So when I say God is not energy, I'm not saying that we don't experience the energetic flow of God, but that God cannot be summated as energy either. And then I made this other statement, and I may stay with this longer this evening, and that is that the spirituality is not about treating the mind. In other words, medicating the mind. Let me say this. When I am sharing these ideas, this is not as much food for thought as it is food for the soul. The thought seems to gain plenty of food. It eats on our doubts and fears and happiness and sadness and anger. It is constantly finding a way. The thoughts are almost parasitical. They find a way to attach. So we don't need more food for thought, but we possibly need more food for our soul. So our soul can gain the energy, the nutritional energy that it needs to recognize its position in this earth experience. That ultimately we are a soul having an earth body experience rather than an earth body having an occasional soul experience. So I wanted to look at some of the difference between treating the mind and transcending the mind. One of the things that Eckhart Tolle teaches that I completely love is that the next level or evolutionary stage of the human is to transcend thought, is to be able to move beyond thought. Or we could say it this way: I give you the keys to the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Is to be loosed from the incarceration of the thinking mind. To be able to not get rid of it, but to simply take charge of it. The same as I mentioned this last Sunday when I said breathing is happening, just like thoughts are happening. But there are moments that I can take charge of the breath and simply remind myself that I can take as deep of a breath as I want to. I can hold that breath and I can release that breath. I'm allowing the lungs to breathe on the autopilot that's in there making it happen, but I also can take charge of those breaths and be intentional about them. The same is true for my thoughts. My thoughts they're not even mine, actually. The thoughts are occurring. The thinking is happening. The thinking is transpiring. I mean, again, neuroscience says between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day. I don't know how they measure those because they are invisible. But approximately, they say between 60 and 70,000. That's a 10,000 spread. And whoever was auditing those thoughts deserves a bonus. But there's 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day that are occurring. I'm not thinking them intentionally, nor could I. Honestly, if I sat down and tried to think 60 to 70,000 thoughts, I would end up not only in a high level of anxiety, but I would end up in a high level of sadness and depression. I would get nothing done. That's my point. The lungs are breathing thousands of breaths a day without my invitation, without my direction, without my interruption. It's happening on automatic. Same with the beating of the heart, the pulsating of the circulation of blood in my veins. All of this is occurring. This is why the Tao Te Ching says to become aware that you're being done more than you're doing. I would venture to say that 98% of what is happening in any given day is happening on autopilot. It's happening to me, for me, however you want to say that. I'm not the one doing it. So why would I think that I should interfere in so much? But remember that I can take charge of my thinking mind the same way I can take charge of my breathing lungs. Now, I got to thinking about this phrase, transcending the mind, not treating the mind, is the work of spirit. Treating the brain or the mind, treating the brain could be a medical thing. Treating the brain could be a psychological thing. Psychiatrists and psychologists and therapists do wonderful work to really help people to reframe trauma and certain things and help to, in many ways, create new neural pathways so you don't have to go down the same dark roads all of the time. But spirituality, I believe, is more about transcending thought than it is about treating thought. It's about transcending the mind rather than treating the mind. So I got to doing a little research, and I found out that in the realm of Tantra, which is out of the East, there's a profound idea that the individual, in his or her essence, is the very embodiment of disease. This is not the simplistic idea of having a disturbed mind or a disordered mind. It actually proposes that the mind itself constitutes disease and disturbance. In other words, it's not just merely the case that you experience tension within. Instead, you are, in fact, the manifestation of that tension. Now, as I wrote this down, after doing some of this research, I realized what was happening inside of me was a bit of turmoil. But I wrote it this way. It may be crucial to grasp the distinction between I'm experiencing disturbance and my mind is disturbance. If one were to consider the mind as being ill, then one might pursue various treatments to address that illness. However, if the mind itself is identified as the illness, an inherent part of one's being, then such an illness resists conventional forms of treatment. It can be transcended, yes, but if you look at it from a Tantra standpoint, It cannot be remedied in the traditional sense. This fundamental difference delineates the contrasting paradigms of Western psychology and Eastern philosophy, such as Tantra and yoga, or Tantra with yoga. So the Tantra with yoga idea is that you are a walking disease. And that you can treat it all you want to with various medications and with various therapeutic treatments. You can do all kinds of things to it. Western psychology has this idea that it can completely unfix the individual by these different mind exercises. And I would say that I am very much a proponent for therapy. I love therapists. I have friends who are therapists who are wonderful beings. The one that comes to mind at the moment is not only a therapist, but also a Buddhist monk, and actually ordained in 2 different Buddhist traditions, and agrees with this idea that the mind is really a dis-ease that's not meant to be as much treated as it is to be transcended. Western psychology operates under the assumption that the mind in its current state can achieve health and wellness. In the Western world, it's believed that there are ways to treat and assist the mind because within the framework of Western thought, there exists no concept of transcendence, nothing beyond the mind itself. There's this idea in psychology and psychiatry that the mind is the ultimate. Transcendence implies the existence of a dimension that's beyond one's present state, and the state is determined by the mindset, a place to which one can aspire to move. However, if one believes that the mind is the ultimate boundary, the end point of one's existence, then the idea of transcendence becomes impossible. But consider this. Think on this. If you perceive yourself as nothing more than a physical body, then the notion of transcending that body becomes futile. It's pointless. Who is it that would undertake the act of transcendence? And to what destination would you as an individual journey to? If your identity is confined solely to your physical form and to this brain and to this mind, then the possibility of moving beyond it remains completely elusive and impossible. The very act of transcending suggests that there is something additional, something more profound beyond the body, which we can refer to as the plus. And this plus becomes the gateway to a deeper exploration of understanding. So my point is, this is not about getting rid of psychology or therapy or medication, but it is about understanding that there is something beyond just the mind. There's something beyond just the body, that you do not have to be incarcerated in this body. This is one of the reasons that St. Paul spends so much time on saying, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. How can the mind be renewed, and by what, unless there's something greater than the mind that can work on the mind? Does that make sense? So when we are born again so that we can see the kingdom of God, see, this is when it starts to get really fun. When we're born again so that we can see the kingdom of God, we recognize the authority is not in the mind, the authority is not in the body, because the mind and the body are both limited. But the limitless possibilities of the divine nature that we really are is the one who we're able to transcend into that upper room. This is why I believe the symbolism is so important of what transpires following the death and the burial and resurrection of Jesus. In the narrative of the Christian story, it says that they went to an upper room in Jerusalem and they waited on the promise. Can you hear this with me for a moment? If we wait on the promise, they that wait upon the Lord, universal law, shall renew their strength. They'll mount up with wings as eagles. This is all symbolism of rising into consciousness. This is feeling good now. Can you hear this? Can you see this symbolism? That ultimately, if we are stuck in the mind and we're stuck in the body, then we are incarcerated and we're doomed to the limitations of the mind and the body. But I came to tell you that I don't believe we are. I don't believe we're stuck in the mind and in the body. I believe for too long we have decided to live behind the bars of these bones and behind the limitations arrested by our thinking mind and the concepts that have conned us out of our greater life. If we learn how to transcend and transform into the beings of Christed nature that we are called to be, into our divine selves, to bust out of the prison if we experience death while we're alive, the burial into the cocoon of the possibilities, and the resurrection out of the cocoon, we gain our wings and we begin to transcend and transform, and we start to then influence and project a divine order over top of our physical order. In a similar vein, if you regard yourself as merely a mind, without any additional dimensions to your being, then the pathway to transcendence is completely blocked. It's dammed up. And the word damned is perfect there, because damned means condemned. There is therefore now no condemnation to them that are in, can you hear this? There is therefore now no condemnation to them who are in Christ. In such cases, we might address specific psychological ailments. For instance, if an individual is suffering from a mental illness, we can certainly work to treat that specific condition. However, the problem lies in our failure to question whether the so-called normal mind is genuinely healthy to start with. The concept of a normal mind often represents a skeptical and conformist state. Sigmund Freud posed this, that our psychological endeavors can only bring a disturbed mind back to a state of normality, which means it brings it back to a perfect state of disturbed. Yet the question of whether this average mind operates from a place of true health remains really largely unexamined by the Western world. We tend to accept the collective consensus that the average mind is functioning well without challenging this assumption. The consequence of this, and as I wrote it, consequently for those who venture beyond the confines of the average mind, those who think differently or experience life in a unique way, there often arises a societal pressure to conform, to readjust, and to realign to some kind of a mainstream. Can you hear this? There's people who start talking about transcending the mind are often thought of as crazy. But Krishna Murti said this, and I've repeated this over and over again. It's one of the things that he said that has stuck out to me. Krishna Murti said, "There's no. Let's see how he said this. There's nothing sane about being well adjusted to an insane world. To be well adjusted to the insane world is to be disturbed, insane." And when we start to talk about transcending the mind to people who believe that there's nothing beyond it because they've simply gotten hurt by or traumatized by somebody who used the name God, often we don't want to talk about transcendence because we think we have to be religious to transcend, and you don't. Religion often will keep you from a transcendent space. It really just replaces the same disturbances under a different name. Transcendence is a spiritual awakening. Transcendence is a rebirthing. Transcendence is a recognition of your true origin and your true essence that exists outside of the confines of the body. But many of us, when we talk about spirituality, even with our family members, they'll often say that we're crazy, that we've lost our mind. And I have a response for that. And that is, I try to lose my mind at least once a day. Because I can point to the mind as being the culprit for many of my ailments in this life. The interesting thing, some thinkers, including the insightful Jeffrey Lyons, have provocatively suggested that genius itself may be a form of disease. If we equate normality with health, then genius, by its very nature, becomes an aberration, a phenomenon, a strange phenomenon. You would be thought of as weird if you're a genius. A genius often operates outside of the boundaries of what is deemed normal. Their unique, strange, and weird perspective about life and thought process may even be perceived as madness in a certain context Many people thought, and still to this day think, that Einstein was crazy. But he also was the one who discovered the law of relativity. He discovered essentially discovered quantum physics. He didn't invent it. He located that it was there, and now we have proof after proof after proof that he was telling the truth. But he didn't locate that through a normal mind. He actually located that through a diseased mind, through an abnormal mind, through an abnormality, which basically meant it was unhealthy. If that's an unhealthy mind, then I think I'll choose an unhealthy mind. But people who have a unique perspective are thought of and perceived of as mad or crazy. Yet because of this madness, there can be a yielded value that contributes to our society. Great inventions. And because it contributes, many of us make allowances for those kinds of individuals in our communities. And we say, oh yeah, he's a little crazy, but man, wow, what a genius. Why is it that we can do that, and yet we don't allow ourselves to understand the power of transcendence? Somebody starts to talk about transcendence, and we think they're absolutely out of their mind. Ultimately, this discourse invites us to reflect on the nature of mind, the nature of being. It asks us to rethink our definitions of health and illness and the societal constructs that govern our understanding of normality and genius, of crazy and normal. It challenges us to reconsider what it means to be truly healthy, both mentally and spiritually, and to explore the possibilities that lie beyond all of these conventional frameworks. I've said this to you before, and I'll say this again at the risk of exhausting you with it. That no one that's ever changed the world did so by doing things the same way they had been done. In fact, Einstein had this interesting, speaking of a genius, apparently had an abnormal and a diseased mind, was crazy, was out of his mind, off his rocker to some. He said the definition of insanity was to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And is that not what we do, even in religion, where we come back to church every week and recycle the same ideas of shame and guilt and being saved from it? We are being put into hell, the hell of the sin consciousness every week, and then brought back out of it toward the end of the service. We are being preached to about fighting a devil, fighting sins, trying to live right, blah, 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 and never really understanding what it is to transcend these things. We're doing the same thing over and over again and trying to figure out why we have not seen a better or an improved result in our world. When you preach guilt, when you preach shame, when you preach hell, when you preach a literally sadistic, angry God to people, and you tell them to be like that God in order for you to go to heaven and not go to hell, you create hell on the earth because they believe that it's okay for them to start to act judgmental, to start to believe that it's okay to torture people if they don't make the right choice or the choice you deem to be right. We must learn how to transcend the mind, not just treat the mind. And this is what it means to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Transcend it, work on the mind from a higher space, retrain, refire, and rewire the brain to operate according to your higher consciousness principles, which, as I've said to you before, it's important to devote ourselves to it: emotions, commotions, and devotions. Let our devotions influence directly and inform our commotions and our emotions. We don't reject them, we embrace them, we integrate them into the love and to the light that we are. We live with them in harmony. We invite them to the rehearsals so that they know to sing the same song and what the words are and what their part is. I mentioned this to someone yesterday. That seeing these emotions, there are four major emotions, they say: the sadness, happiness, anger, and fear. Sadness, happiness, anger, and fear. And I said, if the one that you despise is sadness, and you push sadness aside, and sadness is never invited to the rehearsal of this quartet, how can you expect sadness to understand its baritone note or the words to the song? If you want your emotions to be in harmony, not just treating the mind, but transcending the mind and becoming the conductor of a beautiful harmonizing quartet that can sing the song of your life. Invite them all to the rehearsals. Teach them the song you want them to sing. Teach them to learn their part, the part that they play, and then have them sing in harmony together. So really, this rant this evening is about learning how to not just treat our brain and treat mental illness, but to transcend the thinking mind. And in transcending the thinking mind, we transform our life. I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your love. Thank you for supporting this idea of love, joy, and peace being a daily habitual practice. Thank you for being a part of the meditations. Thank you for being in person at First Unity Spiritual Campus here in St. Petersburg. Thank you for joining virtually through the One Love platform. Thank you for being a part of it. We're coming up on the end of the year, and because of you, we're still here. And I want to say thank you for that. I want to say thank you for those who are going to feel moved even this evening to give an end of the year donation to First Unity Spiritual Campus if you're a member there, to One Love Consciousness Movement if you're a member here. I'm going to ask you to consider giving a tax-deductible end-of-the-year gift to keep us going. Most of all, the gift you can give to us and to the world is to experience your own transformation and transcendence into the great Christ mind that's waiting for you to allow it to be born in you. I'll say this in closing. We're in the Christmas season. Is there any room in the inn? Can you make room in the end right here, to practice the Christ mind and let it be born afresh in you? I hear the music getting started, so I'm going to get up out of here now. My friends, go and make it a great evening and a great rest of the week. I'll see you in the morning for meditation. Peace.